Welcome to the Cyber Health Podcast, where we share science backed tools and expert insights to empower women's health and elevate their lives. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of podcast. Today, we have a very special guest speaker with us. If you are working on the program management or product management domain, this is the podcast that you should definitely listen. Okay, so today we have Bosky with us. She is the founder and CEO of PM Dojo, dedicated to empowering women in product management. With more than 20 years in product and executive leadership, she's experienced the unique challenges women face in the field. PM Dojo's program have helped more than 1,500 women land roles at companies like Netflix, Meta, LinkedIn, Visa, you name it. Her name has been featured in Forbes, and she partners with companies to level up product teams and leaders. Welcome to the podcast, Bosky.
Thank you, Zara. Really excited to have this conversation today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. So tell us a bit about your life before moving. What was home like for you?
What was home like for me? So, I was born and brought up in a very special place in India, and it's called Shillong, which is the Scotland of the East. That's what it's called because it looks like Scotland. It's a very unique place in lots of different ways. I think the geography is very European. It doesn't look like and feel like the stereotype India that gets showcased in all documentaries. And it is I think it is the only place in India that has a matriarchal society. So growing up, that meant that I was always surrounded by some really, really strong women. And that was what I knew to be the norm. So that was kind of an interesting upbringing. So I think when you're in the rest of the India, I think the patriarchal society and the ramifications of what it means for being a woman in a patriarchal society is so much on your face. I was kind of shielded, and my norm was women are really powerful. They can be leaders, they can be advocates, they can do what they want. Education was really high in that state where I was born. We had a 99 point some percent literacy rate. So that was where I think I grew up. My parents' field, career wise, they were earth scientists, both of them, including my mom. So again, kind of, growing up in a home setting where my mom and dad were not doctors or maybe homemakers or lawyers. Um, it was always like, okay, you can be different and you can still be successful without really, I think, understanding the importance of this. But that is what happened. I shut down a zoo when I was a little girl in my city. So I think being a rebel again was very much in my in my DNA without kind of realizing what that would mean. So yeah, such is how I grew up. Went to a convent, had Irish nuns. Again, very strong, but also at the same time very empathetic. Not your typical ones that you see in school, right? I mean, in movies and all. So did that. And then, of course, I went to do my undergrad. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to do a lot of stuff. Somehow got convinced that software and computer science was a better area to study. I always liked technology. And so, yeah, I ended up taking com science instead of architecture. I had a full scholarship to take on architecture, one of the best colleges in India, but my dad kind of convinced me otherwise, and no regrets. That's where I met my future husband. So
Yeah.
did my com science, and then I started understanding and seeing what does it look like for average woman in India to be a woman? Because now I was shielded out of that matriarchal society. And so I still remember like my prof, we would be sitting, and of course I was one of the very few girls. He would be talking, and suddenly, as soon as he would be moving his head, suddenly he would move his head, like he wouldn't even look at me. So I was that invisible. So that was kind of an interesting realization. But of course, once I graduated, I wanted to figure out what I wanted to do. Of course, US was always a dream. However, I come from a very middle class family, and so unless and until it was a scholarship full, I just knew that that was not going to happen. And so I took a year to figure things out, find a job that would at least pay me and I could save some money for applications and visa. Um, and back in the day, like I'm talking about like 25, 26 years ago, 28 years ago, I think in India, it was really one of those back office kind of a thing. So all of these US companies would come in, hire folks from engineering colleges, a lot of the times, either call center. I didn't want to do that. Well, like I didn't study 4 years of comm science to be sitting and answering calls. Like I don't care. A lot of people said, well, just get in. You would be able to move internally. I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And I ended up actually teaching computers in a small local community college, even though the money wasn't good, but that's where I started. And it made me question a lot of the things how people were learning. But that was my first job back in India. And then, of course, I started kind of working to strengthen my application and all of those. And a year later, first time rejection of student visa, second time I got through, landed all the way in Bozeman, Montana, out of all the places in the US. So,
Right.
yeah, that's where I landed, completely lost, confused about everything from milk to living in a basement with 5 or 6 different international students. I had never even realized that you could actually live, completely underground with just that little teeny tiny window. I had no idea, but that's where I started, and started paying up. I had money for maybe just first 3 months. I had to figure it out. How do I get scholarship for the remaining part of my education? And hence started that, a lot of the skills that I think I've kind of picked up over the years. But that was my first job in India, was a teaching, nothing to do with com science. My dad was totally unhappy. But every penny saved from that ultimately led to me coming to the US as an F1 and then kind of set me up for a lot of, I think, how I think about things. So yeah.
Okay, awesome. I love that. So lots of challenges that you say, um, is really unfortunately typical among, especially a woman, coming to a different land and country by itself has lots of shocks in so many different layers, culturally, emotionally, work, education system even. But being as a woman, being treated differently is in another level. And so I have talked to so many immigrant women, and I have experienced that firsthand myself too. Um, and I understand that immigration can be a huge mental and emotional challenge. So I'm curious to know, how did you prepare yourself for that journey, both practically and emotionally?
Mm. It's a great question. And it hasn't ended because I'm here back
Sure.
on visa after all these years. Third time in the US, in all of these 26, 27 years, is the third time we're back in the US. And
Wow.
again, I am on visa again. Um, I think I think I'm going to try to answer this question in, I think, multiple phases because
Mhm.
each phase, I think, was different. So the first time was, of course, as an international student coming in. Um, it's interesting when I think about it, not because it was so far ago, but I think it's also very real and tangible, and I can feel it. I think one, emotionally, it was really hard because I just knew that as a family, financially, it was almost going to be impossible. So I think just seeing how much my mom and dad wanted it to happen for me and how much they put at stake and feeling bad, guilty about making them go through that, I think emotionally that was the hardest. I was also in a long distance relationship with my now husband that I met in engineering. So I think emotionally it was really hard because he had left India and he was already
Mhm.
studying. He moved to Canada. I was thinking US. So I think that 1 year for the first time being in a long distance relationship and not knowing what's going to happen, if we are going to just call it off or he's going to find someone else, like I think I think I felt, what is the word? I think it was very insecure. So I think from my personal relationship standpoint. And the third thing is that I started becoming even more gung-ho and determined that I needed to make it happen somehow. So I think maybe I feel like I would have probably given it up had it not been for my love life that I made wanted to make it work. I would have probably given it up. But but because that was there and I wanted us to be together for whatever reason, right? I think that just made me push through. And, the first hurdle was, of course, clearing those exams, GRE and TOEFL. It's crazy that I still remember that. And I don't learn that way, and I'm a very bad exam taker. And so I think that was like the struggle. And like everybody's like, oh, you need to go and do this coaching and that coaching back. I don't know how things are right now, but back then, and I just don't learn that way. And I really struggle that way. And, but I had to kind of get myself into that system and kind of figure it out. And it was just not me. And I think a lot of times I wanted to just give up. So financially, it was that like, do I give up? Do I make my parents go through that? Because I obviously didn't have money to give. And I think at that point in time, universities were hardly giving any admissions. And so intentionally kind of choosing universities that were state, so fees would be slightly less, choosing universities in some godforsaken parts of the US where fees would be still a little bit less. I think for me, it was like, I need to get out of the country. I need to be able to get that education, create some opportunities for myself, and then be with my future husband, So I don't think I cared for which university because I just knew that that would just be financially just totally impossible. My grades were good in both GRE and TOEFL, but I knew that it didn't matter because the scholarships were hardly being given at that point in time. Post 9/11, no, it wasn't even 9/11. It was something had happened. It was probably some war that had happened, and I think US had reduced a lot of. It wasn't 9/11. That was much later. Um, so I think that was that first phase, going through the US embassy, getting asked all kinds of questions, and then basically seeing a declined or a rejected in your passport, coming back, and then my telling my dad, should we give up or is there another way? Should we try it again after a few months? Seeing that maybe I'll never be with my husband, I think this relationship is doomed. Like I'll have to just kind of be here. Maybe I should have joined that call center. Maybe I should have joined TCS or Infosys or whatever those, right? Kind of makes you question a lot. But then again, it was like, okay, need to make it happen, sit down, get it, go through the process. So I think that was that first phase. So I think from preparation standpoint, it was really, I think, like, okay, this is what it is. I cannot change the examination or the rules. So I will have to, I think, change how I feel about the exam and just get it done and make sure that I do well. And that was hard, but I had to figure that piece out and do it. So that was the first thing, got the visa. And then, of course, the total lack of preparedness to land in a completely foreign country, in a small town that is largely white. And the first question that gets asked of you within, still jet lagged 48 hours later is like, which church do you go? Or I was asked, who's your Jesus? And I went to a convent. Of course, I knew, but I mean, in a jet lag state, how do you even answer these questions? So I think culturally, I was in that part of the US, which was still, I think, very, very religious and very, very conservative. So, the 2 years, I think, just making sure that I got good grades, because again, that was, as an immigrant, it's so important. Um, Forcing myself to take many more credits than I think the average immigrant student that I saw, and international student, didn't working well in my favor. And for the first time, I got a really bad grade in my entire life. And then kind of like, okay, the reality hits. Culturally, education looks very different. Interactions in a class is very, very different out here. In India, you just listen, you do not question. You have to give an answer. In the US, it's very different. You actually spar and debate with a prof. I was not used to that. So I think it took me a long time culturally to just be okay. the more I stayed with international students, I felt I was, and this is something that gets me into trouble, Zara. I was also feeling like I'm not able to kind of, I think, embrace the American culture, right? And so I made a very scary move uh, of actually getting out of the international student housing and moving to stay with an American family as a homestay.
Okay.
So I did
Right.
that. I knew I wanted to stay here and make it work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yes, if nothing works, then of course I go back. But I wanted to do everything and I wanted to make sure that I was at least able to understand culturally because I was struggling so much. I wanted to kind of understand, like, okay, how do these people eat? How do these people talk? What is important to them? What do they celebrate? Um, and kind of, I think, trying to figure out, like, is this even a country that I can maybe stay, or am I just so poles apart that I'll work here for a few years and I'm going to just find culturally so different that I would have to return back. If that is the case, then why even waste all of this time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I deliberately made a move to stay. Surprisingly, my future husband also did the same thing, where he went out of the student housing and decided to stay with a Canadian family to kind of figure things out. So we would exchange notes, we would talk through. So I think that was an interesting period, but I did something which I did not see any of my international student friends do. We would
Mm-hmm.
all stay together, food, all of those were similar. I just kind of broke free and I'm like, rip off the band-aid. I'm going to start eating mashed potatoes and whatever that food is, to the point where my taste buds have completely changed now and drives my mom crazy. But so that was an interesting phase.
That
And then,
was
of course,
a very, sorry to interrupt, but that was a very brave move too. And I just want to add a comment that um, I totally, like, as you were talking, I was nodding my head because I had totally had the same experience coming to US, studying in Middle East, in Midwest,
yeah,
from Middle East to Midwest. I totally felt like there are so many different perspectives at every level. And for me, also the best way to blend was to understand the culture, understand both the positive and negative sides, and understand both perspectives, and try to, because I also wanted to stay here. For so many reasons that now is
yeah,
more obvious than ever. I didn't want to go back. I wanted to stay here. So I also did the same thing. I also moved out of the grad school housing and I rented a room, in American family
yeah.
and lived there for almost 9 months. um, so, anyways, but yeah, that's really brave, and that's, I think, one of the musts for every international, that if for any reason you hit a cultural shock, the best way is just to go through it. And it's a
Is to just
challenge,
go
but
through it. Yeah,
yes,
you know,
yeah.
absolutely. I love that you did that because I don't see this, right? Like so many people questioned me at that point, and I'm like, why would you do that? Like
Mhm,
that's why we have international student associations, and that's why, you shouldn't just kind of feel like you don't have support. And I'm like,
mhm.
I'm still going to be friends with you. I
Right,
just want to see what that is, right?
right,
Like I've
right,
eaten Indian food all my life. I
right,
want to
right.
see what this is, right? Like, and I don't want to just kind of get these 2.5 years again in another protected place and then end up working and then kind of feeling like, oh my God, I'm so alone because none of you will be there, right? And I think
Mhm,
there's something also like the echo chamber when we are just with people who like with shared experiences or people who look like us, talk like us.
mhm,
I feel like a lot of times we just kind of get into that well and just thinking the same way. And I really I think the same
mhm,
thing probably applies to you as well. So yeah, I did that. And of course, then the next piece of struggle was finding a job in the US, which wasn't
mhm,
easy because you get like kind of really at the lower thing, but then you have this 3 months that you have to find a job, otherwise you have to go back. You can only take X type of jobs and things like that. So I think I think again, preparing yourself for that. For me, luck, a bad luck kind of resulted in good outcomes later on. I ended up with some visa trouble 2 months before graduating. And so the
mhm.
question at hand was to redo my entire master's program.
Oh wow. Okay.
or basically get deported back.
Mhm.
So there were these two choices that came up, and I was like, this doesn't work. I don't think I can do my program again with a different thesis and a different topic under a different advisor. Like, it's just not going to work. Like, it's money, right? At the end of the day, because of course I worked like crazy to get scholarship that paid all of my
Mhm.
housing and all of that. I'm like, I can't do that. And so I took a 35, I think it was a $27 Greyhound bus ticket and packed up some of my stuff for 24 hours. Um, Went into my longest bus drive to Vancouver, where my boyfriend, my husband
Mhm.
now, I just wanted to talk it through, and no amount of calling on the phone was helping. And back in the day, of course, it was those phone cards, that pesky little things that just, it wasn't so easy to call like now that we
Sure.
call through WhatsApp and all
Yes.
of that. I just needed to talk. And yeah, and I was like, well, maybe I'm going to sign up for, because they were going to accept, I think one of the universities there was going to accept some of the credit work. And I'm like, fine, I'm going to maybe do that. We were trying to figure that piece out. Canadian immigration is a lot easier than US. I think having his support made a lot more clarity to just talk it through. And we saw an ad on Craigslist for a company in Vancouver that was hiring, and they had a career fair. Both my husband and I decided to just kind of go. He wanted to just take me there as my chauffeur. But then we both ended up interviewing, and we both ended up getting our first job in Canada
Nice.
in that company. I took a tech support job. I just wanted something that would pay me, would legalize my stay
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
another country that I still
Yeah.
have to figure out. So I didn't kind of care about the title. I knew it was a startup. It was a small enough startup that there would be tons of opportunities. And I just
Mhm.
knew that I would raise
Mhm.
my hand for interesting projects. And I knew I would not stay in tech support role. I just knew that.
Mhm.
That belief was there in me. And sure enough, in 3 months, I got my first product manager role in that company. And the rest is history. And so, of course, we did that. And then we moved back to US quite a few years later in 2011, 2012, when I got a job at Atlassian. This time it was a different experience because I came in as a Canadian under a different visa. I had lived in North America. That culture shock wasn't there. But it was an interesting struggle to kind of go through that immigration, this time as a mom, as a new mom, trying to adjust
Mhm.
that, oh, I'm returning back with a little baby who's gone through a whole bunch of things. And we stayed there, and then we left the US again after a few years, went back to Canada. And then this time we again came back on visa, again, as a very different family. My son is now 10. That time when we left, he was just 18 months. This time we're returning with a dog. This time I'm returning as an entrepreneur. And so life is different, and it's been just an interesting journey. But I would say that one thing that is constant is, I think, just figure it out.
Mhm. Sure, yeah. So living as an immigrant is always about figuring things out. And sometimes I joke with my friends that it's also every time in a survival mode. No matter how much you make, no matter how much progress, how many success you have, it's like that mental state that,
Oh
uh,
boy,
yeah, even when you are a citizen and everything is still like that,
it doesn't go away.
it doesn't go away, unfortunately.
No, it's
So,
like, like I'll tell you a joke there. We were Canadian citizens, like we are Canadian citizens, but
mhm,
back in the day when we were living in Vancouver, this was before we even had a kid. So
mhm,
worries were less comparatively, right? With just the two of
sure,
us.
totally.
Kaustubh and I would go on these couple massages a lot, right? Just to kind of relax and unwind. We both, had similar jobs and things like that. It was strange. My head, like there was just, it wouldn't shut down. Like even when we are having the most relaxing, and I would think about the most mundane things. I would be like, honey, did we pay the insurance? My husband is like, you don't even care about paying of the insurance like regular days. Like now you're thinking about it. Like this is what, right? Like it doesn't
Sure.
shut. You're
Right, right.
constantly thinking about that financial stability. You're constantly thinking about, you know, don't want to mess it up.
Sure, sure. So, moving a little bit, fast forward to the to your entrepreneurial journey. Tell me more about PM Dojo. What made you to start this company? What are your target audience and what services do you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I get really excited to talk about PM Dojo. I started PM Dojo
Yes.
6 years ago, so 1 year
Hmm.
before the pandemic. I had no inclination pandemic was coming, but at that point in time, I had risen up the ranks, all the way from the tech support person to being the president of a mid-sized tech company. So, supposedly very good from an immigrant woman of color standpoint. But I was really getting frustrated with a few things. And I was seeing this as a pattern in every single conversation, both inside my companies that I've worked, also with my peers and other companies. So the first one, I used to mentor a lot of folks, and whoever wanted to get into tech or whoever wanted to get promoted, they were all going and doing some standard courses that would teach theory, and it would really not work. It would give you a false sense of maybe good thinking that okay, I've learned some skill, but it really was not helping because they were all theory, and real world is very messy, and just kind of learning something theoretically quite doesn't help, at least in the field of product management, right? It's a very ambiguous role. So that was something that I wanted to kind of figure out, because the current offerings in the market, even today, they just teach you theory and they teach
Hmm.
you frameworks, and it kind of doesn't help. The same thing was happening for people who wanted to get promoted. You would learn some theoretical concept. You would be told, get a mentor. I was told that too. Magically, everything will start happening. It doesn't happen like that.
Hmm.
So I wanted to kind of solve that. The second part of the thing that was really frustrating me was that every single conversation I've had, like I've tried to hire women a lot, and I've done that wherever I can. I've loosened the requirements and I've hired people because at some point I got into a place where I could make those decisions, right?
Right.
As an executive in the company. However, every single conversation that I had, either in my company or others, about why we are not seeing women in leadership roles, everyone talked about pipeline problem. Everyone talked about the bias. Everyone talked about women having kids and then they all leave. And I'm like, okay, so you're telling me about pipeline, but if you look around, you see a whole bunch of women. Like, to explain me this pipeline issue, or explain me how all of these mentorship programs that are there internally, how is that not helping in retaining women? What else is going on? And Canada has an awesome like mat leave and paternal leave. It's not like in some of the other countries where it's just like a few weeks. You get 18 months there. So that both keeps women out for a longer time because they know they have that benefit, but in the US, just because you have fewer weeks, that causes a different kind of a problem. I wanted to solve that, and I knew that I couldn't solve that in just one company because I would only be able to do one company at a time. And that was
Hmm.
frustrating to me. Like, I wanted to, again, rip the band aid off and do it at a much larger scale. And so those two reasons came into starting PM Dojo. There was also a third reason. I was given 3 months to live in 2019. So my health had gotten really, really bad, really bad. And I think and my little one was just 3 years old at that point in time. And I was literally said, you might not be able to see his uh, fourth birthday if you don't change a few things. Um, and so I think a lot of these things came into being. And of course, when the health came into being, I had to step down. So I stepped down. And then as I was getting better, I had to figure out what I wanted to do. And at that point, I have never seen entrepreneurship as a career choice because I think, again, as an immigrant, I wanted stability. I know private companies and tech companies, they don't have stability, but at least I know that if I do well, and at least I'm going to have a paycheck. But entrepreneurship is not like that, right? It's the whole unknown. No one from my family is an entrepreneur. So I didn't have the playbook. And I also did not see someone fitting into me starting out not in my 20s, in the garage in Silicon Valley, and like you were sitting in Vancouver trying to figure it out, and I'm like, I don't know financially if it is. So I have to kind of return back to the company. And I was talking with my husband and I just asked him a couple of questions and I said, I want to solve these problems, but I just don't know if financially it makes sense. Like, are we going to be okay if I take a reroute or a deroute my, what I'm doing from a career standpoint? For how long are we going to be okay? Right. Like,
Mhm.
so we did make some changes in our lifestyle. And I have always been a fan of time boxing stuff since apparently I was a little kid, my mom says. And so this time I time boxed my entrepreneurship journey into 3 months. And I said, within 3 months, I'm going to experiment like crazy and figure out a validated business model that's profitable while I'm solving these two problems. And that's what happened. 3 months, I proved a business model. Because for me, that was really important. If it's not financially viable, then it doesn't make sense. If I am not returning back to a full-time job that pays, then this has to be financially viable because I didn't want to do something that was like a passion project or a side project. That becomes a second thought. So yeah, in 3 months I proved it was viable, and that's how PM Dojo started in 2019 to solve those two problems. Tons of pivots, and 6 years later, everything has grown bootstrapped. I was also very adamant I'm not going to be raising VC funds because then I would have to make a lot of compromises. A lot of it pressure is going to be about having as many people take money from as many people, just kind of get them in an assembly line. And I was changing that education and skill building that way. And so I did not want to do that. Um, and yeah, 6 years later, everything zero paid marketing, and we're still profitable, and we're still doing things that gives me a lot of joy. And I'm seeing the impact every day from seeing women rise up in tech and leading up to C-suite roles.
Nice. That's very fascinating story. So how did you manage this dramatic change um, from your personal life perspective and especially being a mom? How did you manage that with your responsibilities at home, being a wife, being a mom?
I messed up a lot.
Sure,
Um,
we all
Messed
do.
up a lot. Uh, I had crazy arguments with my husband, lots of fights. But I think you do need a very supporting partner to make any of these things happen. We don't have families here.
Mhm.
Um, and so I I think I think something that my dad used to tell me when I was a little girl is I used to hate constraints. Like I just wanted no constraints because then you can do so many things. And I still remember this, like, I don't know how old I was, but I was probably like 6 or 7. But I have this faint memory. We had a school project and we only had like few hours to complete it. And I was getting really frustrated. Like, how is this fair? And can't do. And my dad had said something and he said, constraints are good because that forcing function helps you see things in very different ways. So rather than fight it, ask yourself what you can do and how you can push without kind of going
Mhm.
crazy. And I don't know, like that memory of my dad and I sitting somewhere in the garden of our house and he telling me that, and this was not just a one-time conversation, like this would be a regular conversation just because I hated constraints so much. I think when I came to the real world, constraints were everywhere, and there were so
Sure.
many things outside of your control. But I think that one thing almost became like this muscle that I had trained because I just knew that there was no other option. So I think that one thing did help in all of this. Like, okay, I have this constraint, right? Uh, I have a little one. Um, my husband is very busy at work. I am starting to build this. Pandemic forced us to, kind of not have nanny and part-time help because we all had to go through that, right, for that certain period of time. I think that was another training ground because we did have nanny when we went back to Vancouver and I was in executive roles. We had to bring a nanny on because I needed someone to take care of my son at that point in time. And so suddenly, I think realizing and trying to adapt our lifestyle without having any help, I think that was an interesting adjustment, but I took it as a constraint and I was like, okay, I'm going to slow down a little bit. I'm going to maximize all of my time when my son is in school. Kind of drove myself crazy a little bit. When my son would go off to sleep in the night, I would start working again. So I think that was there, and then slowing down,
Mhm.
especially when school was off. So we had to be very careful
Mm-hmm.
because of my son's health on which kind of summer clubs and spring
Mm-hmm.
clubs or school activities he could go. So I think that was there. We haven't done a lot of, I think, sending him somewhere so that someone could babysit him. That didn't happen, but we did have our old nanny who would come in for some occasional kind of just taking care of him while, I was able to do a few things. So I think those were those initial periods. I think one of the biggest adjustments came when I fell sick. So again, that time having a supporting husband, I think really, really helped because he took care of a lot of the stuff. I think just from a family standpoint, at least during the day, like dropping him to school,
Mm-hmm.
bringing him in so that I could go to doctors and do my therapy because
Mm-hmm.
my health was really bad. Taking me there because we didn't want to risk me going by myself and something happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was kind of a tough period, but we made it through. He and I met when we were 19 years old. So I think we know each other a lot more sometimes, not even having to say, and we kind of get it. I think that's why we fight like old couples, old married couples. So I think that was an interesting period. And then I think initially I would really struggle because I think the pressure to be revenue generating was very high in the first few
Mm-hmm.
years, right? So I think that was when I worked like crazy. I would work on Saturdays and Sundays. I would be teaching on Saturdays and Sundays and never feel like I had any moment off. And I started to feel like I'm going back to that 2019 when my health had gotten bad. So I think after the first 2 years, I literally made a decision to start slowing down. So we used to run 6 cohorts, and I'm the only founder.
Mm-hmm.
I reduced that to three. Just and I was like, I'm going to be okay. Like, I'm not doing this for like becoming a $1 billion business right away. Like, growth is going to take time, but I have to kind of do it within the constraints, right? So I think the constraints thing came back, and I was like, okay, no point running 6 cohorts. I'm going to do 3 cohorts. I'm going to still keep the cohort sizes small, but then I'm going to come up with a different program to augment. So I think again, putting those constraints and then figuring out. So like right now, because of this move and everything, now we have PM Dojo for Teams, which is partnering with companies. That is a lot more, it's harder to do, but once you're able to do it, then you don't have to run after individuals. So a consumer business is very, very hard where you have to kind of one consumer comes in, brings in revenue. But if you kind of go with a company, then one go, you can kind of make a bigger impact because there are more people. So I think every time kind of evolving the business model, really being clear on what are non-negotiables for me, with enough wiggle room because things are never so black and white. It's always on a spectrum. Um, Next year, February, March, we're going to slow down quite a bit just personally, like I know. And so I think trying to again build the momentum right now until January, so that I be okay mentally and emotionally and not keep on feeling so nervous and scared and all of those things because I'm drastically going to reduce the amount of work. So I think as an entrepreneur, you do have a little bit of that flexibility, but I think it needs a lot of discipline and I think building those mindsets, which is really, really hard to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, and then, talking with my dog, I think my dog has helped a lot. So I think that's
Sure.
been like, yeah, that's been I cannot tell you like a lot of times when I'm frustrated, just sitting and he will usually come and just put his chin because he's able to figure out that my energy is like totally out of whack or I'm feeling kind of a panic attack coming in. And yeah, just kind of just having him next to me, just immediately I can see it brings down my breathing back to the normal level. So
Great, great. Um, I agree with a lot of things that you just said, like managing time, delegating some of the tasks to other people as much as you can, slowing down, just pausing and then reflecting. The other thing was personal care. Just it's okay to slow down and pause and spend some time for on a personal care because this is not a one time or 1 year journey. This is going to be at least 10 years journey, and you have to have that energy to keep up.
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think, like whatever you can do. And I think for me, like on that, if I may just add one more thing, Zara, like I've had to change the definition of what good looks like. So
Definitely.
we've completely outsourced our cooking.
Mhm.
So that saves time. I'm grateful I'm able to do that. But that is a cost. Every decision has a cost. I think this is another thing that I've realized, right? Like everything. So if we didn't do that, we would have to spend a whole bunch of time cooking. That means that takes away from something else. So we had to kind of make that compromise and decision as a family. I think, I used to, if I didn't read books, like I would finish books in like 2 days. You give me a book and I would finish it. I can't do that. Like after becoming a mom, it was impossible. Like the first few years, I would only read Little Blue Truck or Caterpillar or the little whatever. I think Goodnight Moon and all of those, right?
Mhm.
Repeated like over and over and over and over again. Where would I read my book? And I'm very happy that my son is another book nerd just like me. So the two of us, we would much rather like we don't go and apps and scrolling on apps. We don't even have a television at home. So the two of us really love reading books. And so we will do that. However, I cannot complete a book in 2 days anymore. And so for me, even if it's a paragraph, that's a success in my world right now. So
Yes.
I think I've had to drastically change that definition of a very clean, pristine home, you know, no toys everywhere, or where this food comes from, or it's still healthy food. That is a kind of thing. But then, if I don't read a full book, just read a half a book, that's totally fine. I think another thing that I've had to kind of, I think, really learn as a mom or as a working mom is a lot of times I think we talk about prioritization. I've had to learn how to deprioritize in order to
Mhm.
prioritize. I think a
Mhm.
lot of times
Yes.
when we are prioritizing, we're adding stuff, but we never remove stuff. And so I actually remove stuff every week. And it has taken me 6 years in my entrepreneurship journey, but I'm totally fine refusing now, saying no. I'm sorry, can't meet. I'm really kind of swamped with blah, 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 blah. Sorry, cannot do a coffee chat. Sorry, don't have time for this. Sorry, not available for a talk. And it's okay. But it's taken me 6 years to start feeling comfortable where I'm like, I don't feel guilty about not doing it. So I think learning how to deprioritize and take things off if you want to prioritize stuff.
Yeah, I love that. I love that the deprioritization and also changing the definition of success. I also want to add changing the definition of failure.
Mm.
As high achievers, especially on women and especially on moms, we are working and doing so many things and succeeding at so many levels. When we are not succeeding, it feels very terrifying that you are, the worst version of yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, so I really want to emphasize on that. We have to reconsider that. We have to say that this is not failure. This is a new way that we experienced and turned out it's not going to work. So this is still a lesson to learn. No failure is a failure if it helps you to step
Move forward.
one
Yeah.
of, yeah, move forward. So, one of the conversations that I listened like last week was that you don't learn surfing by just going into the water and surf. You're gonna go under the water thousands of times until you learn that. I really love that analogy. So
Yeah.
in the beginning of this podcast, we promised our audience that they are gonna love listening to this and they're gonna learn more about it. So what are your advice? This is the final topic. What is your advice, especially for women who are or trying to redirect their career into the product management for
Mm.
succeeding, growing?
Um, there's so many advice I can share, but I think there are a few that I wanted to kind of maybe share today. Um, I think one, it starts with mindset. So life is not fair. That's it.
Sure.
We would like it to be fair. We would like to get things easier. We would like that we didn't have to struggle as much as someone else. And I remind these things to myself every single day. And I have the same conversation with every single woman that I talk to, right? Like, oh, and I'm just like, life is not fair. Like, I cannot change that. I've been given a certain deck of cards. And so, how I see the world, irrespective of everything else that's happening, and what I make out of it is a very important, humbling, and survival skill to learn. Because it can either help you figure things out, or it can either keep you trapped and take you in a spiral. So the choice is literally yours. So I think doing some inner work really, really helps women. And I've seen the magic happen every single time I'm helping a woman in PM Dojo, and I see that transformation. And it's not just warm, fuzzy stuff that you see on Instagram rolling or some inspirational video, right? Like that inner work is a combination of really important skill set to cope, to survive, to thrive. Reframing a lot of the things in terms of how you see and how you question yourself and others and all of that. I think the second thing that I would say is skill building. And mindset is kind of a skill in itself, like it's a mental, emotional skill, but then you also need real hard skills and meta thinking skills, the ability to think through very complicated topics. The problem that happens, especially in product management, again, is there is, more than tens of thousands of courses. People these days are creating courses out of ChatGPT, and you have to, I think, really learn how to discern BS versus what is that real skill that's going to take you closer to your goal, right? So spend some effort on that. Even if you have to spend financial resources, spend it, but spend it on the right one that takes you closer, because the ROI is that times higher, right? Um, it's not easy when, especially if you're an immigrant, because you're counting everything, and most likely you're also converting it to your home currency. I did that for many, many, many years, and I would get a shock every time because I would be converting $1 back. So don't waste, like, then save the money, right? Save money for doing the right thing a little bit later. Don't just go for some cheap, hacky thing that promises you the world, but it really doesn't give you the result. And you will be more frustrated and you will have more doubt after completing something that doesn't help you achieve the goal, because then you're like, oh, I spent all of this, then nothing happened. So I think the mindset and the skill, those would be really important. And the third thing that I want to leave everyone with, I think there's a lot of talk about imposter syndrome and self-doubt, and sure, we all have that. But I remember one of my old founders that so I was in this company, and the first time in the US, and I was really, really like frightened of everything, because everyone around me had come from Google and all of these different companies, and I was so scared because I didn't have any of those credentials. Um, and he had said that the line between humility and being a jerk is very, very fine. You have to decide what side of the line do you want to be. With humility, there will be questions and concerns that you're going to have about your ability. But on the other side, on the jerk side, you're going to become so cocky and so overconfident that no one's going to want to work with you. So you got to ask yourself which side of the line. And I think that made a really big difference in how I saw the whole narrative about self doubt and imposter syndrome. And sure, do I not have it? No, I have it every single day, multiple times in a day, where I'm questioning myself or I'm comparing myself. But I always go back to that few sentences that he said. And I think, use it as a force of good. Like, if you sorry, that's my dog out there in the background.
That's so cute.
Um, my therapist. Um, you know, sure, self-doubt is there, but I think that's again where you're going to be like, okay, which side of the line do I want to be? Because I can tell you that no one wants to work with jerks. So I think it's okay to question yourself, but question yourself the right questions, so that you're telling the right story to yourself and not just telling the story that takes you to the spiral. So I think that is really, 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 really important. I think for any woman that I wanna leave them with.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Um, Thank you so much for joining this podcast. We can, spend at least 1 more hour or two, like talking about different aspects of life, being a woman, being an immigrant, being an entrepreneur. I really appreciate that to share all of your experiences with us. Um, do you have any final words?
Just do it. I think for all the women who are listening, I think find someone who's going to support you and believe in yourself that you will make through. And if you have to tell yourself, like I have a picture here, good women don't make history. So I think that is very much true. You don't have to become bad or a jerk that we were talking about. You can still be nice. And I think there is a big difference between um, there's a big difference. I think you have to understand what quiet confidence means. And I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of narrative that keeps on telling us, well, you have to speak more, you have to be loud, and you have to be this, and you have to be that. And I think you can be you, and you will be a woman. You're going to think about it in a certain way. You're going to talk and conduct your life and work in a certain way. Don't give that away, trying to become someone else that you're not. And you can be quiet and you can still be a leader and you can still be very, very successful. Just starts with believing in yourself. Because if you don't, there's just no way you can expect others to believe in you.
I love that. I love that. Sure. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Cyber Health Podcast. I hope um, we'll bring you some good, valuable lessons. Until next time, take care of yourself.